I handed out for everybody the overall chiastic structure of the Sermon on the Mount. There's two ways to approach that. You can either start at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount and work beginning to end, or you can start at the Lord's Prayer. It's my contention that the Sermon on the Mount is actually a commentary on the Lord's Prayer. In other words, when you're praying the Lord's Prayer, what he's being taught in the Sermon on the Mount is what you're actually praying for. Okay? So, it's not just a sermon, it's a chiastic structure. If you notice, right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount is the Lord's Prayer. Everything before the Lord's Prayer is leading up to it, and everything after it is leading out of it. This time, I'm going to teach it from the standpoint of the point of the chiasm. Okay. Now, if you look at this here, Lord's Prayer, in fact, we ought to read the Lord's Prayer before we start doing this. We found chapter 6, verse 9. He said, "Then pray in this way, Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. For if you forgive others for their transgressions, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, then your Father will not forgive your transgressions." Now, what comes right before the Lord's Prayer is chapter 6, verse 5 through 8. I want to read that. It says, "When you pray, you are not to be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners, so that they may be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, close your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you are praying, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they shall be heard for their many words. So do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him." Now, there are three elements that are integral to Yom Kippur. Can anybody name them off the top of your head?
It's not charity.
Yep, that's it. Prayer, fasting, and charity. What surrounds the Lord's Prayer? Well, before the prayer section, he's talking about charity. After the prayer section, he goes into fasting. Okay, fasting. What do you do when you're fasting? You're praying, right? You know, that's just a natural accompaniment to fasting. So,
He told us we could give something up if we had need.
Yeah, and we're going to take a look at Isaiah 58 in a minute, because Isaiah 58 has to do with Yom Kippur and proper fasting. Okay, so going down to verse 16, right after the Lord's Prayer, 6:16. "Whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance, so that they will be noticed by men when they are fasting. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that your fasting will not be noticed by men, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father also sees what is done in secret, and will reward you." Okay, so you have how to pray and how not to pray, and you have how to fast and how not to fast. Now I want to take a look over to Isaiah 58, because in Isaiah 58, you're dealing with Yom Kippur, since it's the only day that's required as a fast. I know we went over this recently at Yom Kippur, but it won't hurt to bring it up again. Now we'll start in verse 3 and read through verse 11. That was a quick funeral.
Yeah, that was a quick one. Classic Kathy, the funeral was yesterday.
Oh, sorry.
Well, okay. Well, we started off, Kathy, talking about the Lord's Prayer, and the Sermon on the Mount is actually explaining what the Lord's Prayer is talking about. And right before the Lord's Prayer, you have his commentary on prayer. Don't stand and make a show of it. Pray in secret. God knows what you need. When it comes to fasting, that's right after the Lord's Prayer. What do you do when you're fasting? You're praying, right? And the only time you fast in Judaism is on Yom Kippur. So what are the three elements of Yom Kippur? Prayer, fasting, and charity. Which is why we always take up a poor collection at Yom Kippur. That's what all those coins hanging around are doing. They're going in the poor box. So in Isaiah 58, we'll start in verse 3. Verse 1 and 2 is kind of confusing because the people are acting like they're being religious and actually doing Yom Kippur, but they're not. In verse 3 it starts coming out what's really happening. And the people asked, "We have fasted, and you do not see. We have humbled ourselves, and you do not notice." And Isaiah's reply, "Behold, on the day of your fast, you find your desire and drive hard all your workers. Behold, you fast for contention and strife, and strike with a wicked fist." Okay, is Yom Kippur Sabbath?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of the 7 high holy day Sabbaths. Why are their workers working? On the Sabbath, your servants are supposed to have the day off. Even your animals are supposed to have the day off. Okay, so not only are they working their workers, they're driving them hard. Okay, for more profit. Verse 4. "Behold, you fast for contention and strife, and strike with a wicked fist. You do not fast like you do today to make your voice heard on high. Is it a fast like this which I have chosen, a day for a man to humble himself? Is it for bowing one's head like a reed, or for spreading out sackcloth and ashes as a bed? Will you call this a fast, even an acceptable day to Yahweh?" Okay, so going through the motions is not what God's asking for. He's asking for a sincere heart. Verse 6, he tells you what he does choose. "Is this not the fast which I choose, to loosen the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and break every yoke?" And again, you have to go back. What are the 3 R's of the Sabbath?
Release.
Rest,
Restoration.
and release. Okay? Break the bonds of those who are trapped. That's the spirit of the Sabbath. Okay? Verse 7. "Is it not to divide your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into the house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Then your light will break out like the dawn, and you will recover and your recovery will speedily spring forth, and your righteousness will go on before you. The glory of Yahweh will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and Yahweh will answer. You will cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, and if you give yourself to the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then your light will rise in darkness, and your gloom will become like midday. And Yahweh will continually guide you and satisfy your desire in scorched places, and give you strength to your bones, and you will be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water whose water do not fail. Okay. So, the Sabbath is about relieving suffering. Whatever you can do to help someone on the Sabbath, that's the spirit of the Sabbath. That's why when Yeshua was doing all the miracles and healings on the Sabbath, the Pharisees were getting upset because he was working, because they didn't understand the spirit of the Sabbath. They thought it was just about not doing anything. No.
Yeah, helping's not working.
Well, helping
Sure.
people can be work.
Yeah,
What?
it's the,
Helping people can be work.
yeah.
I've gone on the Sabbath to help people who had roof problems and couldn't afford to fix their roof.
Well, I know, that's what I'm saying, helping is not work.
It's not classified as work.
To me, in my heart, helping's not working. I don't care if you're hammered all day and night. I don't think you're helping.
Yeah.
You're not even roofing, you're just godly helping, no matter what you're doing.
Well, that's because the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit's written on your heart. It obviously wasn't on the Pharisee
Yeah,
leaders.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to, okay, that's everybody.
We understood what you were saying.
Okay, anyway, back to Matthew. We're going to take up the next section, or the previous section, to the prayer, which is charity, in chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. See, it's my belief that Yeshua is the one who gave the law, so of course he's the one who understands it better than the people who got to read it. One of the other things to bring up here is that in John chapter 1, Yeshua is called the Word of God made flesh. If you said the Word of God to a first century Jew, what would spring to his mind? The Torah. The Torah. Jesus is the living, breathing Torah. Okay? He not only gave the law, he is the law. Okay, when you violate Torah, you violate Yeshua. Okay, chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men. And by the way, in Judaism, what is righteousness?
That's your tzedakah.
Tzedakah, okay? We have a tzedakah box. It's a righteous box. It's the money for charity to help people. Okay, so he's saying here, beware of practicing your tzedakah, your charity, before men, to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Okay. So, giving to the poor is not supposed to be a showy thing. It's supposed to be... There was a friend of mine who had a book on giving in Judaism. It had all kinds of stories and illustrations. Out of his entire library, which he gave me, he lost only one book. Guess which book it was? It had great illustrations. Like in Judaism, there are like 8 levels of how to give. Okay, to give something in a showy manner that embarrasses both the person receiving it and glorifies you, that's the lowest form of giving. To give something, in secret, where you don't get any gratitude from it, and they don't get any embarrassment out of it, but they still hold their dignity, that's the highest form of giving. Then there's levels in between. Okay? Leave it up to rabbis to splice and dice and everything at as many levels as they can. If you want to read a real interesting book on all the rules of the Sabbath, read the Talmud, Seder Moedim. It's 4 volumes on how to keep the Sabbath, what to do and not to do. I've heard that there's 150 ways you can't cook an egg on the Sabbath.
Wow.
Okay.
I didn't know there was that many ways to cook an egg. I didn't know
I
either.
just want a CYA.
Set it on
Yeah.
the mantle in front of the fireplace.
Make sure to do
Well, that's
it.
normal.
To
Yeah.
dig a hole and
Put it in
Yeah.
the hot sand. Okay. Put it in front of a steaming kettle. All this stuff. Why did these questions come up? Because people wanted to cook on the Sabbath. Okay. And the rabbis are saying, no, you're not supposed to do that. So you can't do it this way. You can't do it that way. And it had to specify everything. Just like giving charity on the Sabbath. I can't pick something up and put it in your hand. I can hold it and you can take it out of my hand. Okay, they have a way of counting movements. Okay, when you talk about the church creating laws that aren't in the Bible, well, the rabbis did it first. Okay, they did what they called fencing the law. Okay, the law says don't do this. Okay, but if you don't do this, you don't get close to breaking it. And then they come up with the rule: if you don't do this over here, you get an even further fence away from the law, and
Wow.
it just multiplies out of control.
That's where the Catholic Church got the idea.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. How,
What a-
how big are the canons of church canons?
Is that what you call straining at gnats and swallowing camels?
That is exactly what straining at gnats and swallowing camels is. And if you go to Matthew 23, Yeshua makes the point. He says, you tithe mint and dill. Okay, these are garden herbs. You tithe all that to the temple. He said, but you've ignored justice. You should have kept the justice and still done the tithing. He didn't say you should have done justice and forget the tithing. No, he said you should have done both.
Both.
And most people read it today and go, well, I'll just do the justice stuff and forget all the ceremonial law. Okay? No, Yeshua said do both. But now, let's get the parallel to this. And in chapter 6, verses 19 through 24, Yeshua addresses the use of money. Okay, so charity is for helping the poor. That's good. Now let's look at the proper and improper idea of money. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now that's the first of what I call a triplet. He's going to hit the same subject 3 different ways. Okay, so he's saying, store up your treasure in heaven because that's where your heart will be. How do you put your money on deposit in heaven? By using it to help people that need it. Okay, that's how you store it up. I don't have a little book with my savings account in heaven. I have no idea what I put in or what I take back out. But God has it. Okay. Verse 22. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? I fumbled over this for years trying to figure out what the heck is this talking about. And once I saw it in context, he's talking about the evil eye, the greedy eye, the stingy eye. Okay? If you are stingy, you have an evil eye, and that's going to color everything else in your life. Okay, as the light comes into your body through your eye, if you're stingy, that's going to color every act you do. But if you have a generous eye, if you love people and you care about them, then you have a good eye, and your whole life will be affected by the generosity. Okay, that's the point he's making. And then he goes on from there, verse 24. No man can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Okay, now notice that the word there is wealth, which in your King James will say mammon. That's accumulated mass wealth. That's not kesef. Kesef is the Hebrew word for silver. That's the money you need to take care of your needs day by day. Okay, kesef is not being condemned at all. Okay, you need money to buy food, to pay your rent, blah, 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 all the things of life. He's not saying throw that away. No, he's saying these people had masses of money invested and collected, but they had a stingy eye. They loved their investments that they had on earth more than God, more than people, more than any concept of charity. Okay, so what he's doing here, he's contrasting how to look at money with, treasures with charity. Okay, here's the 2 sides of the issue. And this comes under, I believe, in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Okay, you're asking God to provide for your daily needs, not getting rich. Getting rich. Okay? There are loads of people who have lots of money and have a stingy eye. There are also people who have lots of money and are generous. Okay? I can think of one owner of a company who was very generous, multimillionaire, And he was constantly out trying to support Christian causes. Okay? He wanted to do good with his money. Money isn't any good unless you do something with it. Just having it in the bank and getting more of it, you're not helping anybody. You have to, you know, I think the best explanation I ever heard is money is like cow manure. It's no good unless you spread it around.
I
And
never
every
thought
farmer will understand that, okay? You can use your money to build the kingdom or just enrich yourself and make your life easy. Yeshua tells a story about a rich man who hoarded his money. And he said, my barns are all full. I'm going to tear my barns down and build bigger barns and store up for myself. And that night, God takes his life. He says, you fool, you didn't know what to do with all the riches you had. In a lot of cultures, it's more important that you share what you get. Within certain Indian cultures, I'm talking about American Indians, the leader of the hunt, you would think would get the greatest share. No, but if you were the leader of the hunt, you got a great deal of glory, but you made sure that all the widows and orphans got food out of the hunt. You might walk away with nothing. Okay, but you had the honor that you were the leader who made sure everybody got taken care of. Back in ancient Israel, when you read the Old Testament, it talks about people who were landowners who grow a lot of crops. And when famine comes, the people who are honored are the ones who share that stored up grain with the people who don't have food. Okay? Because they're honoring God by caring for other people. Okay? What's funny though is that most charity doesn't come from the rich. It comes from people one level above you. Okay? Because they understand what you need in reality. A lot of times when rich people give, they throw a whole lot of money at something, but they throw it in the wrong place or to the wrong people. Which is why the government shouldn't be in charge of charity. Because they don't know what they're doing. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but welfare admits that 20% of what they pay out is fraud. People are conning them. They know it. What business could throw away 20% of its money and survive?
I know, I'm moving my hand.
Oh,
The
okay.
most charitable people I've ever found are the poor.
Yeah. I remember my
They're
dad,
quicker to share, you know.
because they know what it's like to be hungry. My dad told me about a social worker that went up into the hills where the people lived in really fallen down ramble shacks and had little plots of land they farmed. I got to see a lot of what those farms looked like in Tennessee. I mean, what looked like a big yard was their farm. That was their whole farm. And you're thinking, how did they survive on this? Okay. And the social work went up there and they're talking to this guy. He's got it on a shirt with still got one button left on it and blue jeans with holes in it. And you can tell that they're not real well fed. And they start telling them, we're here to help the poor people in this area. We're going to try and take up collections to help them. And the man looks at him and says, well, if you let us know who they are, we'll be happy to help.
Love it.
It's a matter of perspective. I love Dolly Parton's song about the coat of many colors. You know, it's a coat her mom made for her, made out of rags, sewed all together. And she has a line in there that I found interesting. You're only poor if you choose to be. It's true we had no money, but we were rich as we could be because they had family unity and love. Okay, money isn't the definition of poor or rich. Anyway, let's take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 15 because this plays into it. Deuteronomy 15 has to do with the 7th year release. And we're not going to read the whole chapter, although the whole chapter is worth reading. And this would be the basis for a lot of what Yeshua did. Starting in verse 1. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a remission of debts This is the manner of remission. Every creditor shall release what he has loaned to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor and his brother, because Yahweh's remission has been proclaimed. From a foreigner you may exact it, but your hand shall release whatever of yours is with your brother. However, there will be no poor among you, since Yahweh will surely bless you in the land which Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess, if only you will listen obediently to the voice of Yahweh your God, to observe carefully all this commandment which I am commanding you today. For Yahweh your God will bless you as he has promised you, and you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow, and you will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. Okay. So every 7 years, all debts are canceled. Now, if you remember, there was also a 50-year cycle, 7 times 7 plus 1, in which all land went back to the original inheritors. When Moses took them into the land, there was land allotted to each tribe, to each family in the tribe, and that land was theirs forever. It was called the Nakhavah, the inherited property. Okay. People can get themselves into debt and even sell themselves into slavery to pay off their debt. But in Israel, you could only keep them as a slave for 6 years. You had to set them free in the 7th year and give them money to get themselves reestablished in some kind of business. And that's actually in the second half of the chapter. Okay. But the point is, you're not supposed to have any real poor among you. Okay? Because you're going to get the debt canceled every 7 years. You get a chance to start over. Okay. Now, in one case, I've read that a famous rabbi actually wrote a law canceling out this law, and he did it for the good of the people, because there were people who could loan money, but they said, the 7th year is coming up, and I'll have to forgive that debt in 6 months or a year, so I'm not going to loan you anything. Go ahead and starve. Okay? And he wrote a law that said you didn't have to follow this anymore. He was trying to help the people who needed to borrow the money, but it contradicts what's here. And when you contradict God's law, it's never a good outcome.
I know I was surprised one time because a professional friend of mine, he's now Messianic, but he was a cultural Jew. He became a Christian, in the Baptist church, and he was hurting financially. And I felt like the Lord sent for me to give him some money, and he refused to take it. But the reason he refused, he said, is because my family is giving me the money. They were honoring their obligations to take care of each other. I was really impressed.
Okay, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, going on in verse 7. Now, this is one of those really mean-spirited Old Testament passages that you just want to avoid. Don't look at this, because God is so mean. Okay? If there is a poor man with you, and one of your brothers in any of your towns in your land, which Yahweh your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor close your hand from your poor brother.
There you go.
But you shall freely open your hand to him, and shall generously lend him sufficient for his need and whatever he lacks. Beware that there is no base thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of remission is near, and your eye is hostile toward your poor brother, and give him nothing, that he may cry to Yahweh against you, and it will be a sin in you. You shall generously give to him, and your heart shall not be grieved when you shall give to him, because for this thing Yahweh your God will bless you in all your work and in all your undertakings. For the poor will never cease to be in the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother and to your needy and the poor in your land. Isn't that a mean-spirited thing? That's that nasty Torah law. You're obligated to help people.
Well, really, that's what
It's
happened
a
in my
blessing in doing
case.
it.
Well, if you do it, you get
You
blessed.
get 100-fold back, you know?
Now, notice in verse 9 the phrase, your eye is hostile. What did we just read up here about the evil eye? That's what they're talking about. Linda.
How do you count 7 years? Like
Um,
from today, let me count 7 years from today because I feel like it. If it's 7 years, how old you are? Is it 7 years on the calendar?
We no longer have a basis for calculating the 7th year. That's lost in history with calendars. When they burned the temple, the records of the years and what year was Jubilee and everything was lost. There are some people who think they know when it is, but I remember Ed asking Rabbi Perez about it, and he just hooks in and says, nobody knows.
I think what they're doing in Israel right now is that they started from the day they were made a nation, and they've been going and using that as day one. And so they've had a jubilee year, 50 years,
Right.
and they're now, you can look it up and see where they think they're at, and you can use that.
Where do they use it, 47 or 67?
What?
Would have been 47, 47.
Okay, from 47. So
Yeah.
if you were Jewish and you had a business and you lent money, you could follow that if you wanted to.
Yeah,
So count from like 1947?
Yes, that would be the first.
yeah, so every 7 years.
So I'm
I
not.
think it would actually be May 14th, 1948.
Oh, yeah, you're right,
Oh,
that would be
48,
it.
okay.
That should be it.
Val?
Isn't it more important to keep the spirit of the law than
Yes.
the actual letter of the law?
No.
Well,
No?
I think that it's
both.
questionable.
You should keep the letter and the spirit of the law.
But if you don't know when it
The question is, if you
is.
don't know
Yeah.
when the 7th year is, all you can do is keep the spirit of the law. Melanie's granddad had a farm. He rotated his crops by 7 years. Okay, so he was keeping the spirit of the law by letting one field rest for a year every year. But I don't know that there was any way for him to know the year of Jubilee or the 7th year. So, but
but it
Israel
kept-
probably has something set up for
But it
it.
kept the spirit of the law. I mean, I did that myself. There was something that had come up and that year was the year to let the ground, lay fallow, and I did. And planted the next year. But, I'm keeping the spirit of the law.
Yeah. And that's important. And you can keep the spirit of this law every day. Okay, because you're helping people who have needs. Okay. And what's funny is, he says at one point, there shall be no poor among you. And he says, the poor will be with you always. Okay. Well, why are there always going to be poor? Because people aren't going to do it.
Right.
Okay. Breaking Torah will guarantee that they're always poor with you. Okay. That phrase comes up in the Gospels. Do you remember when? The woman who brought the very expensive oil or perfume and poured it over Yeshua's head. And Judas goes, this could have been sold for a lot of money. Well, he said that because he was stealing money out of the purse. And Yeshua said, you'll have the poor with you always. Why? Because there's always going to be a thief. Okay, people that don't follow the Torah will make sure that they're always poor. Linda, do you have your hand up again?
No,
Okay.
this is a little bit off base, but I think it needs to be said. In the Old Testament, whenever the word love is used to the Hebrew mind in Deuteronomy, it's talking about love. Emotion never came into it.
Exactly.
Heart means mind in that era. And so you love the Lord with all your heart, your soul, and your strength. It's your mind, your soul, and your strength. And so, you can get into these rabbit tracks about, what about this and what about that? Because emotionally it makes me feel bad. That had nothing to do with any of it
Exactly.
back then.
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. But the point is, this is one of those mean Old Testament passages.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that the law is oppressive and bad, and we don't want anything to do with it, right? That's what I was taught in Bible college.
Uh-huh.
Okay. They were wrong. Obviously, they've never read the Torah. or read it and never understood it.
or understood it. 'Cause
Yeah, it's like
if you
people-
read it from a Western mindset of
Yeah.
this century or last century, yeah, it can come across that way.
Well, and here's one of the things that come out. People think that the New Testament did away with all the law, okay? It's a radically inconsistent position,
Yeah.
but we can't go into all the details. But think about this. Who interpreted the New Testament for over 1,000 years before the Reformation occurred?
Catholic
The
Church,
Catholic Church.
which is why they didn't want them to be able to read it.
The anti-Semitic, anti-Torah Catholic Church that wanted to make up their own rules. They wanted to replace Judaism. Okay, instead of a high priest, you have a pope. Instead of sacrifice where we actually offer animal sacrifices, you have a bloodless altar. Okay, they copied Judaism to replace it. Well, they didn't want to keep things like the kosher law because they're mostly Gentiles. Okay, so they found ways to interpret or misinterpret biblical passages so that they could eat whatever they wanted. Okay, when the Reformation took place, did the Reformations really start with Scripture? No, they started with what they had been taught.
Right.
The Catholic priests, the Catholic Church are the ones who had trained them. It was their seminaries they went to. They, like most of the people in the American church, think they've got the New Testament down cold. They've got answers for why there's no kosher law anymore. They didn't rethink that. Okay? They didn't realize that they'd fallen into a trap because this is what everybody knows. Everybody knows the New Testament did away with the kosher law, right? Until you read it properly, until you understand the terminology. There's no such thing as an unclean plant.
Right.
Unkosher only applies to meat, to animal flesh. Okay? And I think it's Mark 7 where Jesus declares all food clean. Okay? They're talking about grain. Grain is never unkosher. That was a rabbinic law that said if you didn't wash your hands, then you made it unkosher. Okay, it was a rabbinic made-up law. It had nothing to do with actual kosher. Okay, and in Acts chapter 10, if you read the passage, it's not really talking about food.
Right.
And God never says, I declare unkosher food clean. He says, don't call unclean what I call clean. Peter finally realizes that what he's calling clean are the Gentiles,
Right.
not the food. And of course, Peter's a pretty bold guy. When God told him to rise and eat something unkosher, what did Peter say?
Never.
No.
And I never will.
No, I've never eaten anything unclean, and I'm not going to. Okay? He obviously didn't get the memo. Okay? And all those 3 years with Jesus was a total waste, because when Jesus told him all his pigs were clean to eat, he missed it. No, actually, wait, I don't remember that. No, what did Jesus do with the pigs? He sent demons into them, and they went and drowned themselves. He didn't go, hey, look at all the free food. Okay, because the meats that are unkosher, according to Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, are not food. It's very specific. These are not food. So in Judaism, if you talk about food, he declared all food clean. He's talking about kosher food, and in this case, grain.